This word from Zechariah is a mix of comfort with a recognition that the people who were reflecting on their judgment, their scattering, their exile, may have felt guilty for it. This was our fault. We rebelled. This was our fault. We had idols. This was our fault, our injustice. They may have just felt guilt, and this brings up, and he's saying, no, you can come back now. No need for shame. You can come back now. You don't have to settle there. I have this beautiful place here for you. You don't come back. Don't feel guilty. And I think what Zechariah is saying here is the guilt hanging over God's people will not last, which I think is a good message for us right here, right now. The guilt hanging over God's people will not last. I don't know about you, but there are endless variations of guilt in our life. Like we have this old English sheepdog that doesn't look like that, beautiful puppy. And whenever we leave the house, she follows us out and then just lays on the backyard and gets big puppy dog eyes. And when we come back, she's in the same spot. It could be we come back 30 minutes later or 3 hours later. She's in the same spot. And she's just like, why did you leave me? We can feel guilty that we didn't take the dog with us, that we left the dog outside, that we didn't take the dog for enough walks. It's easy to feel guilty for stuff like that. I feel guilty that I even spent money on a dog. You might feel guilty that you watched too much TV. Oh man, I just spent like 3 hours binging last night. I stayed up way too late. Too many video games. I waste too much time. You can feel guilty for that. We feel guilty this side of heaven. We feel guilty for a lot of things. There's endless variations of guilt. You could feel guilty because you didn't text somebody and you told them you would. You could feel guilty because you ate too much. You could feel guilty because you know in certain places you're super spiritual, and then in other places you have a horrible mouth. You feel two-faced. You feel hypocritical. I mean, there's endless variations of guilt that we can feel. I don't know where you feel guilty. Here's the beauty of walking with Jesus. I mean, Zechariah gives us a hint. Come back, come back, come back. You don't have to feel guilty. You don't have to settle. You don't have to be ashamed. Zechariah gives us a hint of it, but with the New Testament, we know that there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. This room is filled with sinners. Every single one of you has one reason or another you could feel guilty. Every single one of you. For gossiping, for judging, for being addicted secretly to something. Every single one of us. But there is no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. So here's what happens this side of heaven. We feel guilty and we get accused by the enemy. And so there's this voice in our head that just says, woe is me, I'm so terrible. And it goes on and on and on and on. It makes sense. We have an enemy and we latch onto lies. That's the way our brains tend to work, unfortunately. But here's a truth you can bank on. There is no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. That we will someday fully realize when we see Jesus face to face. Because the guilt that hangs over us will not last.